Bacol Tov.
Which is good, Jay.
Well done, Susie. I didn't know the answer to that.
Hebrew, that's what it is. In honour of my trip to Israel. Hebrew means good day, yes, or hello. Or Masay al-Khair, which means good evening. Since Arabic and Hebrew are the two main languages. So as you can see, I've gone really old school with my sermon this time, with lots of scribbled notes on pieces of paper. A whole 5 pages worth.
It's all right, you write big.
Yes, this is true. I do write quite big. So, I haven't done a word count, so this is either going to be quite a short sermon, in which case, you're welcome, or it could be a slightly longer one, in which case, yeah, tough, suck it up. So, I'm going to have to stop kicking the lectern for a start. This is the first in our series on gender topics. Gender in the Bible. I think it is. Yes. It's a good guess. And this week we are looking at roles. I'm sure we've all been subjected to the more traditional version of gender roles. I know that I have. Starting in primary school and even later, I was taught men did this, women did that. Men were supposed to act this way, women were supposed to act this way. Clear separation between the genders. What a load of old tosh. I'm working on swearing less. I hope you appreciate that. Gender is a far more complex issue and could give rise to a number of sermons all by itself. So actually I'm chuffed that today all I have to address is the issue of gender roles. In the reading from Ephesians 5, Paul tries to set out a manner in which a husband and wife should relate to one another in marriage. Their roles in their life together. And on the face of it, he seems to favour men in charge and women as a supporting act. But does he? After all, he says men provide leadership to their wives. But he explains that they do this by cherishing, loving and caring for them. And wives likewise show support for their husbands in a similar manner. He makes the point that they are one, which seems to me to be saying that actually they're equals. He says about them being one flesh. So he can't be more equal than being part of one organism, surely. I mean, he doesn't go on and say, well, actually, no, it's really 75% men, 25% women. So I, for one, am glad that the Bible seems to support my happy wife, happy life philosophy. And Paul freely admits it's all a bit of a mystery to him. So clearly, he seems to have had no real experience of women or marriage. So he does the only thing he knows how to do. He compares it to something he has more knowledge or experience of, which is his view of Christ's relationship with the church. Good to see he can take ownership of his own views and try to make it a bit more relevant. So what about the gender roles? How should we look at them? How should we think about them? How should we, dare I say, even apply them? Now, people often tell me that the Bible is all about the men, that it supports and upholds men's supremacy over women. It's a good time to be a man. The women are totally ignored. Man the leader, woman the follower. Well, that's not entirely true. Yes, the Bible highlights certain men, and in general, it seems to concentrate more on men than women. And yes, it does often overlook women, or plays down their contribution. But then in the time of Jesus, it was a very patriarchal society. But that said, there are lots of notable women in the Bible. I'm not going to go through them all, you'll be relieved to know. But there's no doubt in my mind that in biblical times, it really sucked to be a woman. The law was unevenly balanced against you. You were often subject to the whims of men. and your ideas, thoughts and contributions were barely noticed or even actively dismissed. However, despite all that, even though the scales were heavily weighted against them, some women were still honoured as leaders and teachers of great strength and wisdom. Women such as Deborah, judge of Israel. I mean, she had almost limitless power. And it lasted for 40 years. She had political, religious, judicial and military control of the whole of Israel. Total authority. Now, it's hard to argue she wasn't the equal of any man in that situation, since many of the male leaders, prior to her and after her, had failed to maintain the position for that long. I mean, there are many more women in the Bible, but Deborah seemed to me to be a great example of how women in biblical times were actually able to crash through the glass ceiling. And anyway, does that even matter? Does all this matter? After all, surely for us as Christians, all we need to look at is what was Jesus' position on all this? We have chosen to follow him, to hold him as our ideal. So what light can he shed on all of this gender roles malarkey? Thankfully for me and for this sermon, enough to give me a few ideas to jot down. But first I want to quickly mention 1 Timothy 2, verses 11 to 15. Now, I got this from the NIV, the nearly infallible version, and it goes like this. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love and holiness with propriety. Wow. Now, those few lines seem to really spell it out. Again, this is from Paul, and it is often used to justify only having men as church leaders or as preachers, and generally used for subjugating women or proving man's supremacy. Seems pretty clear, doesn't it? I mean, it is quite strident, but in it there is one saving grace. It says in verse 12, I do not permit. To me, this indicates that Paul was owning his own prejudice, his own bias. He doesn't say the law does not permit. He does not say the Lord does not permit. He did not say Jesus is way against it. But instead indicates that this comes from him. That these are his thoughts, his ideas, or his feelings on the matter. So although, unfortunately, these few lines muddy the water somewhat, I actually admire Paul for being so honest about his own views. Especially as, or so it seems to me, they are at odds with Christ's own teachings. Or at least, Christ's actions. Which to me speak volumes, way more than any words ever could. A few quick examples. For one, Mary Magdalene seems to always be close by and pops up several times in the Bible right alongside Jesus. Right there amongst the disciples. To my mind, this means she was a disciple. If she followed Jesus everywhere, if she was there when he was teaching, surely that's a disciple. And it does seem that she was certainly a part of his inner circle. And then there was Mary of Bethany. And to me, this really seals the deal. One of Lazarus' sisters. The story goes that when Jesus went to their house, she sat at his feet to listen. And that's a position always adopted by disciples. Even though the social norm demanded that She joined her sister in the kitchen to prepare food for guests, to serve them. And in fact, when Martha points this out and complains, Jesus says, "Whoa, Martha, chill. Mary is where she should be." To me, that clearly indicated he only accepted her as a disciple or student. So it seems to me that Jesus accepted everyone, and that gender was never an issue for him. I believe he had a very high regard for women and readily accepted them into his ministry and his inner circle. I also believe he truly felt we are all equal, and that we should work together in partnership in all aspects of life. So although Paul muddied the water slightly with his own personal bias, it seems to me this was an anomaly, and that as Christians we must take our lead from Christ, who, I believe, looked at the spirit of the person, not their gender, saw what was inside and did not let the outside colour his view of them. I actually think it would really fit in with today's non-binary view of gender. It may be more complex than the one he grew up with, but I believe that he cared more about a person's heart than how they presented themselves. I'm sure there will always be people who cannot accept that the old binary system no longer works, and that as messy, complex, unique individuals, we need a more flexible outlook. But in this respect, being Christian makes it somewhat easier, as all we really need to do is to look at how Christ acted, what Christ taught, what his view was. And on this matter, I feel he clearly embraced the equality of the genders. And as his followers, I believe we must embrace the full spectrum of gender identities and not limit the roles that they can play through our own bias or prejudices. A bit like Paul did, but we don't play the blame game. To me, the Bible gives us guidance on gender roles. Fair enough. But demonstrates that the roles are not fixed or necessarily strictly defined or limited by gender, but are more flexible. Women clearly filled many of the same roles as men did, depending on their ability, on the circumstances. And I truly believe that Jesus embraced the wholeness of each person, regardless of their gender, and did not try to limit, constrain, or pigeonhole people based purely on their appearance. So as Christians, surely we must do the same. I believe we should create opportunities, not obstacles. Challenge the norms, not just blindly follow them. Embrace the whole person and not get hung up on just one aspect of them. After all, if Paul had not written those few verses, who knows where the church might be now? Instead of where it is, which to me seems to be at a position of just starting to catch up and follow the example of Jesus. Thank you.